So sorry, Rohit, yeah, you can go ahead.
So yeah, just a little bit about myself. So I have been active in the nonprofit sector for about 15 years. Um, I've spent a number of years on some grant review boards at the provincial level, which includes the Ontario Trillium Foundation as well as the Youth Opportunities Fund with the Ministry of Children and Youth. And then I've served on some boards as well, most notably Volunteer MBC, which is the volunteer center for the Peel region. And so I started my company to raise money for organizations who are doing good work in the community, grassroots groups, any kind of organization that's doing really important work. And so today's webinar is going to focus on some tips that you can follow in order to obtain funding for that work. Did somebody have a question here? Okay, so a little bit about my business and our services. So we do three things. Number one is all-inclusive grant writing. So we will write grant applications from start to finish, budgets, work plans, any sort of attachments, even uploading the grant onto the online portal. And this is a really helpful service because a lot of folks find it a little bit scary sometimes to apply for a grant or to navigate all of the different grant applications. And so that's something I specialize in. Prospect research really involves looking at all the different funders that might be well suited for your organization or for your mission. And then we narrow down the top 5 or the top 10. We'll do a report. We'll tell you about the funder, what they fund, why they fund it, how to obtain that funding, what is the eligibility criteria, when is the deadline, what's the process, how do you contact them, and we'll even make a recommendation about how much money you should apply for. So prospect research is something that's very customized towards every group that we work with, and it's another service that we provide. We also do professional development training, kind of like this. So you'll find that throughout the year we will be running a lot of Zoom workshops this year because of the special circumstances, and we're always pleased to partner with ACBN on any workshops and opportunities to connect to the network. So if you're ever looking for professional development, please contact Ryan and we can chat. So I'm going to focus today's presentation on the 10 most common grant writing mistakes. And I'm trying to share this information as a past grant reviewer, but I think at the same time, there's a lot of mistakes that we see sometimes first-time applicants or those who are new to grant writing. They'll take on a certain idea or a certain mindset, and they'll come into the grant writing with that. And so we'd like to dispel myths. And because I'm somebody who's been on the largest grant review body in Canada, I can tell you with confidence what funders really want and what they look for and how you can avoid making mistakes that are costly or time-consuming, etc. So let's get into it. 10 common grant writing mistakes. Number 10 is no statistics or research. So if you're to look at all the challenges that people go through when they're applying for funding, one consistent challenge is that they haven't identified the need to justify why they're doing the work that they're doing. So this is also known as evidence, and it really makes your application much better when you can tell them why you're producing backpacks for children in September, or why you're running this after-school youth program. And a lot of times, it really helps to justify the need for the funding. If you can justify it, then the funder is more likely to empathize with your work, your cause, and to want to support that cause. And so I think as a grassroots organization, you need to ask yourself, how do we know this is really an issue, right? Sometimes it's a matter of personal opinion, and sometimes it's a proven issue. During COVID-19, we're getting contacted by organizations who deal with domestic violence. And a lot of times when they're thinking of applying to a grant, I challenge them. I say, well, how do you know that this is an issue? And they'll say, well, you're hearing it a lot on the news. But I don't think it's enough to say that I'm hearing about an issue on the news. I think we need statistics, we need data, and that information is out there. It just takes time. And so I think it's also important to know why your work is important right now, because you will enter into a funding competition among many organizations who are all saying that their work is important, but generally, an issue like hunger or poverty, it's a long-term issue. It's not really going anywhere anytime soon. And so you really need to paint a picture about why your project and your solution is important right now. And you need to try to convince that funding body using this research or these statistics why they should fund you. So one area where you can find some information is the Vital Signs report. I give the example of Mississauga Vital Signs. And this is put out by community foundations all across the country. So they are a fairly large funder. So I recommend reading those because they have some good information and statistics that can really support your funding applications. Another one is client surveys. So a lot of times people will ask a client, are you happy? Are you happy with our program? I don't think that goes deep enough. I think you really need to look at how you're making a difference. And this needs to be done well before the grant, probably, even before you apply for the grant. You need to know what kind of quantitative and qualitative results that you're looking for. So for example, if we have an after-school program for youth and we're trying to figure out how is this program going to make a difference, maybe we can measure the grades of the youth. We can keep their names anonymous, but we can see if there's a letter grade increase in their studies as a result of this program. That's a pretty good measure. At the same time, we can obtain testimonials. Maybe some young people join your program because they're feeling isolated or they don't have a lot of friends. And then after joining their program, they can actually testify, giving true testimonials as to how the program has made a difference in those friendships. So I think surveys are really important, and this still falls under statistics and research. Your statistics should also be local. So I see people putting in information about all of Canada or global rates of poverty and hunger. You need to speak to the very local need, and you should avoid making any statements that are considered broad or vague. A lot of times your municipality can actually provide you with some very good local statistics. The Economic Development Department is the one to speak to about that. And I can't tell you what a difference it makes to start off a grant application with 1 or 2 sentences of really solid research. It's just impressive as a funder, and it will make you more likely to obtain funding. Top 10 most common mistakes on grant applications. Number 9, submitting late applications. How many people have submitted a late funding application? Probably everybody. This happens all the time. People wait till 11:59, and a lot of times the system crashes at 11:59 for that reason. And this is a real issue because you find that you're stressed and you're waiting until the last minute, and then when you're submitting it at that time, many times you're missing important things, or you may forget an attachment. So the whole thing is really not advisable. Fill out online applications as much in advance as possible. If you have an online portal, try and get everything done in the portal in advance. And actually try not to even be on the portal around the same time when the deadline is, because it's likely that everybody else is doing the same thing. The other thing, of course, is to always save a copy on your own computer or on the cloud somewhere. It's pretty embarrassing to get a grant and then to have to reach out to the funder and ask them if they can send you your application back. You don't want to do that. So bottom line here is don't submit them late. Try and get everything done a day early. That's our policy at DoGood Fundraising, and I think it just reduces stress for everyone. So top 10 most common mistakes. Number 8, not utilizing attachments. Ontario Trillium used to have on their seed grant an area where you could add up to 5 attachments. They've since taken this off, but I find most grants give you the option. And I'm always surprised when applicants leave this blank, because I think it's a missed opportunity. You're doing great work and you've probably taken pictures, you may have testimonials, you may have research, you may have a report on the program from last year. Always take advantage of attachments and upload it. And a secret tip is that if you only have one box to upload an attachment and they ask you to upload a PDF, just add additional things to the end of the PDF as long as they're completely relevant. You're not going to get in trouble, or you're not going to lose the grant application because you attached a few testimonials at the end of your upload. So I encourage you to do it. I can tell you as a past grant reviewer, that they actually read it. We read testimonials, we read photos, and it can sometimes make a pretty big difference. I find a few organizations have put together video overviews, and they'll put it right on the homepage of their website, or they'll put it on YouTube and they'll add a link to the application. I think that can be pretty effective. And as long as the video is not too long, the reviewers will actually look at it. So, top 10 biggest mistakes, number 7, underselling your work. As a nonprofit or grassroots organization, a lot of us make the mistake of wanting to be humble or wanting to really focus on this particular project when we have a whole past record of great work that we've done. We have a history of past success in our projects, in our programs. And so you need to brag at this point. It's like a resume. You want to put out your best work and you want to put your best foot forward. And you actually want to tell the funder some specific examples of past successes. Maybe you've been working in the community of Rexdale for 2 years and you've impacted 100 women on domestic violence and improved their lives. You need to write that down in the grant, and you can include it in the section that asks you about your past history or about your accomplishments, or tell us about your organization. Just one sentence which really speaks to your past success can help to add a lot of legitimacy to your organization, and it can help to make your organization appear more organized and really appear better in the eyes of the funder. And so I think you shouldn't judge how a funder is going to look at this information. Maybe you only improved the lives of 5 people, or maybe you only helped 5 youth. If that's a success for your organization, then you need to write that down. It doesn't matter if another applicant impacted 50,000 youth. If your organization has been able to make an impact, then you need to let the funder know that, because everybody has their own success in their own way, and you shouldn't judge or hold back. You know, this is really your moment to shine and to let funders know about all the great work that you do. So, top 10 most common mistakes made on grant applications, number 6, not expressing urgency. If you are working with vulnerable populations, especially right now, COVID-19, you have to tell the funder that your population is vulnerable. You have to tell them that it's urgent, and you have to tell them that they need help now. Some examples, because you don't want to appear too aggressive or too strong. Some examples that you could use in your own grant are, this grant is essential because if we receive this funding, it will enable us to immediately, or without this grant, we wouldn't be able to, right? So in the case of youth, without this grant, we wouldn't be able to service the high-risk needs of Rexdale youth, for example. That helps to tell the reviewer that, okay, the work they're doing is not only essential, but if we don't fund them, there's going to be some negative consequences. And, I'll give you the example of the Royal Canadian Legion. I remember I was reviewing a grant a few years ago, and they contacted us at Trillium, and they submitted an application saying that their roof was going to cave in. Yeah, I remember reading this, and then we got to the review meeting, and we were talking, and all of us reviewers said, look, if their roof caves in, we are going to look bad, right? We wouldn't want to be the agency that didn't give them the money, and then their roof caved in. So I think it's interesting that when you use the word urgent and you really express urgency, funders will fund you. They'll absolutely fund you, and sometimes they'll even break the rules and fund you either faster or with more money, that sort of thing. So urgency really helps to prioritize your work or your project. Another common grant writing mistake is starting from scratch every time. I see people do it, and I don't recommend it. So why not start your grant where you left off on your last grant? Number 1, come up with a program plan. So a program plan is where you write down your entire program for the year, and you essentially outline what it is that you're doing, what are your goals and objectives, how much is it going to cost, and a few other details. And you come up with that every year, you work with your board of directors, and you revise it, and you make it better. If you can do that, I think you'll be very successful in starting the next grant, because we all know starting is often the hardest part. And I think you can continue to revise that each year and make it better and better. And of course, you'll have new programs, you'll add them to the plan. Maybe you might end a program, you can take them off. A budget is essential. And I want you to look at your whole organizational budget for all of your programs and try and fit everything together. You know, an organization might be applying to President's Choice Children's Charity, for example, and they may want their after-school program to be funded, but it's interesting that if the after-school program involves equipment and another program involves equipment, you need to determine which of these programs are going to use that equipment. You may find that in your budget, in your organizational budget, you've asked for money from one funder or another funder for the same thing. And this is why I think your organizational budget needs to be for everything. It needs to be for the full organization. And so if you do that, then you're more likely to go into a grant knowing exactly how much everything's going to cost. And that way your programs can also work really well with each other. I also think that to avoid starting from scratch, you need a strategic pitch for your grant. So you need to outline in detail what your grant applications are trying to achieve in maybe a paragraph or two, and you need to be able to pitch that to all of your grants. And so if you've done that already and you have that information from previous grants, save that somewhere so that you can put it in the next grant proposal. Because from time to time, the questions will be similar. Sorry, did someone have a question? That's Shelley?
Shelly, you have a question?
No, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's strategic pitches, and then common attachments. Every grant application will ask for the same thing: letters patent, listing of your board of directors, financial statements. If you can come up with that information in advance, and if you can keep it on a folder somewhere or on your hard drive, you will have no problem applying for grants faster because the information's already there. I remember we were applying for a grant for the United Way last year, and one of our clients needed their letters patent, and they told me, it was the day before the deadline, and they told me that it was in somebody's basement, and they had to go get it.
And the letters patent, that's similar to incorporation documents, articles?
Yes, it's the same thing essentially. Your letters patent and your articles of incorporation are same
hold on a
works.
sec. I think, is that an announcement going on, or okay? I think it's done.
So what you want to do is you want to essentially keep these documents digitally somewhere where everybody on the board can access it, and that way you won't run into the problem of having to go to someone's basement and pull out a document. Nobody has time for that. So remember that anytime your proposals get declined, get that feedback and then submit it again next time with that feedback, right? So don't completely submit a brand new idea just because it was declined. Speak to the funder, obtain that feedback. And as I said, you start where you left off. And so we use Google Docs. We actually have all of our clients work on Google Docs. And a lot of times we'll have the entire team make revisions on one document. And then that document is saved for the future so that you don't have to start again every time. Okay, so that's starting from scratch. Just continuing along here with the top 10 most common mistakes that are made on a grant application. Number 4 is not committing to long-term projects. So I blame funders for this because funders have told you that you cannot apply for the same grant every year. You have to submit a new project idea. It has to be unique. It has to be innovative. So people make up a new project every year. It's interesting, though, that just because you're working on a long-term project doesn't mean that it has to be brand new every year. It just means that you have to submit a piece of that project every year. One of the easiest ways to do this is to give it a new name, that piece of the project, and to ask for something very specific. Maybe it's technology, maybe it's equipment, maybe it's a staff member, like a coordinator. And so as long as you are focused on your mission and you don't change your mission, you know, today you're serving youth, tomorrow you're helping animals, you have to really be focused on one mission, stick to it, and funders will see it, right? And I think as long as you do that, you're probably more likely to get funding from the funders who really agree with the whole long-term vision of your work. And if some funders funders don't agree with it, you might want to have a follow-up call with them if your grant gets declined, and you might want to let them know about the 2 or 3 year plan that you have to help youth in Rexdale, for example. So the other thing, of course, is that long-term work often is more funded by foundations and corporations because they seem to get it, right? They seem to get that things take time, and that if you're working on this environmental conservation project, maybe it's a 5-year time frame instead of 1 year. On the other hand, the governments tend to follow election cycles, 3 years, 4 years, short-term thinking, and this is why I find a lot of government foundations and government funding, it really tends to be more short-term, whereas I encourage you to really think long-term. So, top 10 biggest mistakes, number 3, spelling and grammar. You really want to make sure that anytime you're submitting a grant application, you've used a basic spell check. I understand English isn't everybody's first language, and that can be challenging if you're trying to write a grant. It's not your first language, but there are so many resources out there. There's companies like mine where you can pay a small amount of money and get us to do a professional review and edit of your grant. There's times where I was reviewing the grant and I didn't really understood what it said. Sometimes people have used a lot of jargon, like very specific wording that's not common, and so that can make it confusing. Sometimes the sentences have missed key things, and so as you read it, you're not really clear on what it says. But even if it's basic spelling and grammar, it actually sends a bad message to the grant reviewer. If the grant reviewer is frustrated or they're not understanding what you're trying to submit, they're probably not going to fund it. So make sure your applications are easy to read. Make sure you author your proposals in something like Word or Google Docs. You can then use the spell check feature, and then you can copy and paste that content into the boxes that the grant applications have online. I find that a lot of the grant applications don't have any sort of spell check feature, and so I don't advise that you write up your grant in the online portal. I advise that you do it in a Word document, for example. Okay, so make sure you review it. If you need the help, please contact Ryan and see how you can get help with getting your grants reviewed. And that goes for entrepreneurs as well who are applying to loans and financing. It's all the same and it's all applicable. So I talked about jargon. This is another major mistake that people make in a grant application. I was working on an application for a hospice organization that's like an end of life. And as I was working on it, I noticed quite a bit of industry-specific jargon that was provided within the documents that I was reviewing. And it's interesting, the word palliative care, right? You may have heard of palliative care, but maybe you haven't. And it's not a word that I use every day. And so I had to really take a moment to think about it. Okay, palliative care, what does this mean? And so to you as a hospice organization, that might be something that you use all the time. It's on the tip of your tongue, but grant reviewers might not. So I encourage you to think with the grant reviewer's perspective. Grant reviewers are people just like you and me. They're ordinary people. A lot of times they go to work, come home. They're not in a specific industry and they're not using tons of jargon. And so make sure that the people who read your grant get it. Use a very simple language, maybe at a high school level or even more simple, because you want people to understand what you've written. At the same time, even though I'm saying don't use jargon, there's only one type of jargon that you should use, and that's the funder's jargon. So for example, COVID-19 funding is out right now, and they're talking about vulnerable communities, vulnerable people. If you see the funder continue to use the word vulnerable, make sure you use the word vulnerable, otherwise you might not get funded. I think it's so important that the funder's language be listened to and understood. Half the times, if you can just make sure that you've listened to what the funder has asked for and you've responded to their call, you'll probably be way more likely to be successful than folks who miss those keywords. As a general tip, I just recommend having a friend or family member read your presentation, because a lot of times they'll ask you if something doesn't make sense, or if you've used some wording that's not common, they'll call you out on it. And the number one tip, the number one most common mistake when it comes to grant applications is not answering the question. So this is absolutely frustrating for funders, for grant reviewers. You know, we'll ask a question like, how is your organization going to make an impact in this issue? And they'll respond, you know, 25% of people are living in poverty. So a lot of times when a question is asked, you need to make sure that the first sentence of that answer right away starts to answer the question. And the trick is you take part of the question and you put it in your answer. That tells the reviewer that you're actually reading the question. There are so many times where I would reread an answer. I would say to myself, you know, the answer really has nothing to do with the question, right? And so you have to also do the same thing. You have to look at the question, look at the answer, and reread it and say, did I even answer the question? If you didn't, you know, make those changes. And any statements, any opinions, if you believe that, you know, poverty is a serious issue, or poverty is the biggest issue faced by our youth today, try not to include that in the application, because a lot of times they don't want to know your opinion, right? The funder wants to know the facts. They want to know statistics. They want to know what's happening on the ground. They want it to be proven. So please make sure that you avoid any statements that's vague, or a statement that is an opinion as opposed to fact. If you do that, I guarantee that you'll have more success. You know, try and follow these tips and try and avoid these common mistakes, and you'll probably be much more likely to be successful in your requests for funding or financing. Thanks very much, everyone.